you, Vidyaji. And I'll now ask two Indian Dharmacharis, Abhaya Navita and Tara Hridaya, to come forward and take a garland which will be placed into the coffin. And Tara Hridaya were actually the last people who visited Bhante. They were his last visitors. Offerings generally at this point in the ceremony, just these 7 traditional offerings. So all of you will have a programme, so I won't go through what exactly is going to be happening, but I do want to say that everything happening today in the ceremony are things that were either chosen by or very important to Bhante. The mantras that we'll be chanting through the day are the 5 mantras that Bhante Sangharakshita asked us to chant from the time of his death, and they have been chanted continuously around the world. Those 5 mantras. 5 Buddha Bodhisattva figures, very, very important to Bhante Sangharakshita. The speakers are people who knew Bhante well and who were well known by him. We're doing the Metta Bhavana, short practice of loving kindness. We'll do a Sevenfold Puja, both of which are practices which are part of our common corpus of practices spoken and done throughout the world. And afterwards, when we're over at the burial, we will hear the Dhammapala Gatha, part of the Dhammapada, which was also a text very close to the heart of Bhante. The music was chosen by him, both the music that we heard when we entered and music that we'll hear later. So now I'm going to ask Paramartha to come up. He's going to share a reading with us and say a few words. Thank you.
Namo Guru Urgen Sangharakshita. Over the last few months, I've had the great privilege to be able to read to Bhante Urgen Sangharakshita in the later part of the evenings. He had wanted to go through a new translation of the 100,000 songs by the great Tibetan yogi Milarepa. And at the end of each reading, Bhante would sit for a while in silence, with his eyes closed, sometimes with his fingertips lightly touching, and that characteristic gesture of his, in what always felt to me like a deeply absorbed, even meditative state. In fact, on Bhante's final night in the annex, when I was helping him to get ready for bed, he suddenly turned to me, and I must admit he surprised me. He's wont to do that. By saying, well, you do remember the connection I had with Milarepa. And whether I looked a bit confused or sounded confused, he quickly added, I've written about this in my memoirs. Of course. He was referring to the first volume of his memoirs that we know as The Rainbow Road. I'm ashamed to say that at the time I couldn't recall the exact detail of that particular passage. So as you can imagine, before bed, I reread it. It's probably been about 3 times I've read it. And realized that actually it recorded Bhante's very first encounter with the life of Milarepa and the 100,000 songs at the age of 21. When he had been posted to Singapore during the war. In his memoirs, he singles out one particular song that obviously made a very deep impression. He talks about, and I quote, being especially moved by the song in which Milarepa, the Tibetan poet saint, hails his broken pot as his guru, because it has taught him the law of impermanence. Reading the life of Milarepa, Bhante, in another very moving passage, then goes on to say, and I quote, my hair stood on end and tears came into my eyes. If I had any doubts about the nature of my vocation, they were now dispelled. And from that time onwards, I lived only for the day when I would be free to follow to the end the path that seemed had been, in reality, mine from the beginning. The following day, as we were waiting for the ambulance, the day he was taken to hospital, the day before he died, he again asked me to read for him, the 100,000 songs. Of course, we didn't have time to finish. So I would like to dedicate this song of realization, the song of transience with 8 similes, from Tibet's great yogi to our own precious teacher, Urgen Sangharakshita, who in many ways has given us so much. The song of transience and 8 similes. Faithful disciples here assembled, ask yourselves, have I practiced Dharma with great earnestness? Has the deepest faith arisen in my heart? He who wants to practice Dharma and gain non-regressive faith should listen to this explanation of the mundane truth and ponder well their meaning. Listen to these parables and metaphors. A painting in gold, flowers of turquoise blue, floods in the vale above, rice in the vale below, abundance of silk, a jewel of value, the crescent moon, and a precious sun. These are the 8 similes. The gold painting fades when it is completed. This shows the illusory nature of all beings. This proves the transient nature of all things. Think, then you will practice the Dharma. The lovely flowers of turquoise blue are destroyed in time by frost. This shows the illusory nature of all beings. This proves the transient nature of all things. Think, then you will practice the Dharma. The flood sweeps strongly down the vale above, soon becoming weak and tame in the plains below. This shows the illusory nature of all beings. This proves the transient nature of all things. Think, then you will practice the Dharma. Rice grows in the vale below. Soon with a sickle it is reaped. This shows the illusory nature of all beings. This proves the transient nature of all things. Think, then you will practice the Dharma. Cloth, soon with a knife is cut. This shows the illusory nature of all beings. This proves the transient nature of all things. Think, then you will practice the Dharma. This precious jewel that you cherish will soon belong to others. This shows the illusory nature of all beings. This proves the transient nature of all things. Think, then you will practice Dharma. The pale moonbeams soon will fade and vanish. This shows the illusory nature of all beings. This proves the transient nature of all things. Think, and you will practice Dharma. A precious son is born, soon he is lost and gone. This shows the illusory nature of all beings. This proves the transient nature of all things. Think, then you will practice Dharma. These are the 8 similes I sing. I hope you will remember and practice them. Affairs and business will drag on forever, so lay them down and practice now the Dharma. If you think tomorrow is the time to practice, suddenly you find that life has slipped away. Who can tell when death will come? Ever think of this. Devote yourselves to Dharma practice.
So the temperature has gone down a little bit. So we can warm ourselves up with metta, loving kindness. But for some of you, that might not be enough, because you might simply be cold. And we really did mean it when we said at the beginning, and as what we informed before you came. If you want to get up and have a cup of tea, that's really so we really mean that. Please don't freeze. Nobody wants that. So this is a period of metta, loving kindness, towards Bhante, Ogyan Sangha Rakshita, and the Triratna Sangha, our beloved Triratna Sangha, and beyond our Sangha out into the whole world. And in the first part we have an opportunity to call to mind our friend and teacher Bhante Ogyen Sangharakshita, to feel our love for him, to feel our appreciation for him and our gratitude to Bhante. And I'm sure that calling Bhante to mind in this way, he can be very present to us today, and this will always be possible, night and day. Meditating on Bhante's qualities of kindness and wisdom, our faith and confidence in the Dharma will grow stronger and stronger. So, in a moment, for a few minutes, we will call Bhante to mind. And after those few minutes, I will ring a bell, and then let us call to mind our Triratna brothers and sisters here at Adistana and around the world, hopefully able to see us right now and to participate with us right now, and certainly even if they are not seeing us online, there are definitely many, many thousands are keeping us and Bhante in their minds and hearts right at this minute, all over our Triratna world. So let us together establish the wish to be connected with each other in metta and in harmony, in one worldwide Sangha, brought together by our precious teacher. Then I will ring a bell for a third short stage. Short but heartfelt metta for all humanity. Let us cultivate the wish that the blessings of the three jewels fall on all, for the lessening of suffering in the world, and that the Triratna community can make a significant contribution to this, so that the legacy of Ogyen Sangharakshita's teaching shines on for many, many generations to come. brought the sun into the barn. So in a moment I'm going to invite Subhuti to make the first of 3 addresses to us. Subhuti first met Bhante in 1969. So he has been a friend and disciple of Urgyen Sangharakshita for 49 years. He was one of the first to whom Bhante handed on responsibility for ordinations. And he was appointed by Bhante as the first chair of the College of Public Preceptors. For many years he has divided his time between India and the West. I invite Subhuti to address us now.
Dear brothers and sisters, Namo Buddhaya, Jai Bhim, Jai Urgyen. To me, Bhante, since his death, has become Urgyen, fully. And I'm sure, like many of you, Bhante has had a huge impact. He's had the major influence on my life. Mahamaji told you that I first met Bhante 49 years ago. Actually, I saw him for the first time 50 years ago, almost to the day. I saw him just walking along past Hampstead Heath. I had no idea who he was, but the image of his mindful, self-possessed presence is indelibly imprinted on my mind. I can see it right now. And it was only later that I realized the person I was learning meditation from was the one I'd seen so much earlier, or somewhat earlier. I did see him in Hyde Park at a Rolling Stones concert, but he denies it. Since Bhante's died, I've sort of realized more fully the impact that he's had on me. I feel he's in every breath I take. I feel he's in the flow of my blood. I feel he's in the beat of my heart. And his presence is at the back of my mind, sometimes right at the front of my mind, all the time. And it always has been. But since there's no physical locus for his presence, I've realized, in a way, who he really is. Freed from the specificity of a body, he's become something vast and limitless. That presence has not always been a comfortable one, I have to say. Certainly for me, and perhaps for some others too. Bhante is He certainly wasn't. Uncompromising, unconventional, and sometimes outrageous. And I wouldn't have it any other way. He's, of course, a human being with a particular character. And that character, that human personality, has led to things that I certainly found difficult to come to terms with. But nevertheless, always, and even more now, I've experienced the shining light of the Dhamma through him, penetrating deeply inside me, and which I will never, ever be losing. it can't lose it. It's so much part of me. And I'm sure that in various ways this is very much the same for many of you, that Bhante will have affected your life, turned it upside down, inside out, and you'll never be the same after that encounter, I hope. Bhante himself is very aware of his own limitations. He famously said that he was not really the right person to start a new Buddhist movement. He had so many limitations. In a way, any being has to occupy space and time. And whatever's in space and time has to be specific. It can't be everything. And if it's one thing, it can't be another. So, by definition, any teacher has to be something very definite and therefore not something else, and cannot encompass the whole field. And this is the sort of paradox of the Bodhisattva. And I believe Bhante is a Bodhisattva. I'm convinced Bhante is a Bodhisattva. At what level, what stage, I've no idea. That's beyond me, and I don't really care. It's really only the Buddha in whom there's a perfect consonance between transcendental realization and temporal manifestation. That's what the Bodhisattva does, lifetime by lifetime by lifetime. The Bodhisattva prepares him or herself by practicing the paramitas so that they develop a perfect body of wisdom and punya, so that when they manifest in their own Buddha field, they are perfect. But up until that point, the Bodhisattva is always, as I say, specific, doesn't cover the whole field, maybe has flaws, maybe has blind spots or whatever. But always the Bodhisattva is in touch with something transcendent. And it's that transcendent dimension that drives the Bodhisattva. So yes, I believe that though Bhante himself considered himself to be limited in certain ways as a founder, maybe just by virtue of being, as he says, interested in the humanities rather than science, maybe in other ways. Nonetheless, he was deeply imbued with the spirit of the Dhamma, which shone through him upon so many thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. In India, you see, sometimes I've certainly myself addressed crowds of 30,000, and Bhante himself addressed so many hundreds of thousands of people, all of whom caught that shining light a glimmer of that shining light of the Dhamma coming from him. And so many people in the future will catch that, even though they never meet the man. His influence will live on. So that's the paradox of the Bodhisattva, and we must keep focusing on what the Bodhisattva is attempting to body forth, and that Bhante so skillfully actually has bodied forth. Look at us. We are the sons and daughters of Orika and Sangharakshita. I keep thinking I'm in India. Yes, we're Bhante's sons and daughters, that born of his mouth, as the Buddha says, of himself. And we're trying to continue the Bodhisattva activity that Bhante began so wonderfully. So Bhante says that he was not the ideal person to start a new Buddhist movement. The new Buddhist movement had to be started in 1967. And it's worth us just reflecting why that is the case. It's difficult to sort of realize it now because the world has changed so much in the last 50 years. It's a very, very different world in so many ways. But in 1967, when Bhante felt himself constrained to start a new Buddhist movement, the scene for Buddhism was not very promising. He started in London, in the Hampstead Buddhist Vihara, working at the Buddhist Society, and by his own account, and something of my own experience, it was not a very dynamic or attractive setup. Buddhism was still primarily an upper middle class preserve. It was still predominantly intellectual in its appeal, and its sort of profile was conventional, you might say. Bhante was, for instance, told by one of the leaders that he should consider himself the Buddhist vicar of Hampstead. If Bhante is not anything, it's not a vicar. Nothing against vicars, of course, but Bhante isn't one. It wasn't very promising. Lot of sectarianism, even though there were a few dozen Buddhists that were already polarizing into sects. A wonderful faculty that we have as human beings to polarize. He'd been working in India and very closely identified with the movement of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar and considered himself to be taking that movement onto his own shoulders at Babasaheb's death. But he'd found it more and more difficult to work because the movement was essentially getting more and more bogged down in politics, both politics as its idea, as its perspective, so to speak, but also internal politics. For instance, he found that when he was in Pune, he couldn't get the different Buddhist groups to agree to arrange his program. So he relied on the Pune District Women's Association, which was run by later Dhammacharini Dhammalochana, whose daughter is here today. Ashmita. So Bhante felt increasingly cramped by the environment of Buddhism in India, even though he was deeply inspired and felt a strong connection with the generality of the new Buddhists. He wanted to help. It was increasingly difficult for him to do so. So, not very promising there either. The situation for Buddhism generally was not very bright. Buddhism has been in the 20th century in its worst period of decline ever. We only have to think that the Chinese invaded and really pretty thoroughly tried to stamp out Buddhism in Tibet from 1956 or so onwards. Of course, they didn't succeed, but they certainly broke it as an essential part of the local culture, of the broader culture. In many other countries, Buddhism has been in retreat from communism, and more recently from the universal and most effective religion the world has ever known, consumerism. Materialism has really pushed back at Buddhism. And Buddhism has not responded yet, as a whole, all that well. There are very bright spots, and there are certain groups and individuals who very much kept the Dhamma alive. But as a whole, Buddhism has been in decline. Bhante saw this very, very clearly and saw that what was needed was a completely new start. For one thing, Bhante was very aware of the broad spread of Buddhism. And he, from the start, I think at the age of 18, he gave a talk at the Buddhist Society called the Unity of Buddhism. So for him, Buddhism was a whole. You couldn't align yourself with any one particular school. You had to identify with the whole of Buddhism and draw on whatever was valuable in that in order to try to re-express the Dhamma in the modern situation. And that's what he set out to do. And for all his saying he wasn't the ideal person, he was certainly good enough. And here we are to prove it. He was certainly good enough. Even though he's left us a few very nice little conundrums and difficulties which keep us on our toes. He's been a good enough guru with sometimes absolutely impeccable instinct. Nothing, for instance, demonstrates that instinct as his choice of when to die. He might have chosen better weather, but in every other way, he's chosen the absolutely perfect moment. When it almost passes, well, we deeply mourn him, but we're not worried. We're not bothered. We know that Bante's done his work. We've taken into us the task that he's given us. We're well accustomed to taking the responsibility. 18 years since he handed on his responsibilities as head of the order. He timed impeccably. And he died just before the public preceptors were meeting, so that we could... Well, I think they had a brief discussion. I'm no longer I'm a retired public preceptor. They had a brief discussion of what after Bante. So they all said, why are we talking about this? We just carry on. It's all going on. Bante's timing is impeccable. And it's important that we, at this point in having a very pure experience of Bante, because we're freed from his spatio-temporal existence, to sort of dwell a little bit upon what it is that is left, something transcendent, something that can't be caught in the net of words. He himself says that he does not consider that he founded the order and the movement. It was founded through him by what he talked about at some points as a supra-personal force. At another point he said that there's a vast overshadowing consciousness that founded the order through him. And it's that vast overshadowing consciousness that I believe he has now, as it were, become identified with. He's fully part of that and fully continues. He will continue to function in the future in whatever way we do not know. I had an extraordinary conversation with him about 6 years ago when we were still in Birmingham, Majamaloka. It took my breath away, like sometimes happens with Bante. I went to see him and he said he wanted to die. He was ready to die. He said he found this life disgusting, was the word he used. I think we must be careful how we understand that. I understand it as nibbida or nirveda, for those of you who are dharmically knowledgeable. This sort of sense of not wanting to be attached to the world. So he said he felt this sort of disgust with the world, and he wanted peace, he wanted a rest. He looked forward to a rest when he died. Oh, Bante, you've got it now. And may you deeply enjoy it. He wanted to die so that he could rest from his labours. And it's extraordinary that he actually kept going. And I think he kept going because he wanted this place to be established so that something stood there as a focus for the future. And it was a tremendous strain for him to move here. When you're 80, 88, to move is very difficult. Most old people die when they have to move. But he took it. He did it because it needed doing. And yes, he said, yes, I find this life disgusting. I don't really want to continue it. And he said, but I do believe in rebirth. There is rebirth. I believe in it. And he said that, and there is the Bodhisattva vow. So I'm sure that I will be reborn. I, of course, asked him where and when, because you would have blamed me if I hadn't. But he wasn't going to be drawn on that one, very sensibly. I think he thinks he's quite capable of sorting things out for himself without our help. But I think Bante will be back. We may not know it. We may not know that he's here. But that spirit that carried him along through this life, into this life, that founded this order, will continue, is continuing, and we can continue in contact with it. He himself was deeply connected to that spirit, and he's completely identified with it now, and we simply need to think of him, as Mahamati suggested, and we will be in contact with that essential spirit that now permeates the whole order and the whole movement, and that will flow out more and more fully into the world.
Thank you very much, Subhuti. I'd like to now ask Dharmadina, Dharmacharini Anagarika Dharmadina, to come up and share some memories of Bhante. So Dharmadina was ordained on Bhante's birthday in 1973. She was a very young woman then, and she's going to share some stories of her time with Bhante.
Brothers and sisters, I feel very fortunate that I knew Bhante Urgyen Sangharakshita for over 48 years as my preceptor, my teacher, and my friend. So I met him when I was just 24. I think he must have been 44 or 45. And I met him on my very first retreat, which was my first contact with Triratna. I think I must have read his name, Sangharakshita, because I expected to meet a traditional Theravadan bhikkhu or monk, someone with a bright orange robe, a shoulder, and a shaved head. And Bhante did not look like that when I met him. When I met him, he was wearing quite a shabby, crumpled robe. He was wearing over an orange polo-necked sweater with a Tibetan mala. There were probably slippers somewhere. And he had very long hair and with big bushy sideburns. So that's the Sangharakshita that some of you will only know through old photographs, but that was how he looked on that occasion. So quite unexpected for me. And we were sitting in a lounge on the retreat, and he was talking about having stayed up all night and watched the eclipse of the full moon in a hippie commune in America from where he'd just returned. So I was completely fascinated by this man. I just felt, who is this man? Being a young hippie. I felt I couldn't pigeonhole him or categorize him in any way. And I was even more fascinated later that day when there was supposed to be a lecture. So I was excited there was going to be a lecture. And that turned out to be Bhante Sangharakshita sitting on a chair next to a reel-to-reel tape recorder on the floor, listening to one of his own lectures, which was, I think, one of the Eightfold Path series, I can't quite remember, and laughing at all his own jokes. It's a very, very bizarre experience. I think that very tape recorder is an exhibit in the library, actually, so go and worship the tape recorder. Because the words that came through that tape recorder, and obviously through him, had an enormous impact on me. They were delivered with communicated with such clarity and such depth, and I resonated so deeply with what was coming out of that tape recorder, the Dharma, that I felt that I had a direct transmission of the Dharma as truth from Bhante, and in that moment, he became my teacher. So I'm sure, along with many of you, since Bhante died, I've had many, many memories of my many meetings with him, one-to-one, in teachings, in meetings. And my many one-to-one meetings over the years, I think the thread that runs through those meetings is one of kindness, of great kindness. So I come along at 24, I'm very shy, I'm quite troubled, and yet he took the trouble to befriend me. I think he could see that my connection with the Dharma was sincere. And I'm 24, so in a way, I grow up in Triratna, do my growing up in public, as it were. And although I've had many, many positive experiences in my life, my Dharma life, I've also experienced quite a lot of bereavements, loss when I was young, quite a lot of heartbreak, psychological difficulties, quite a lot of ill health, and spiritual and dharmic questions and doubts. And he always met that with a great deal of kindness. He was kind, understanding, encouraging, and very perceptive. He knew how to kind of find out what was really going on and what would help in any particular circumstance. He was very kind to me much later on when I was looking after my mother, who was very sick and dying, and I also held quite a lot of responsibilities And I was quite sort of torn. I was conflicted as to how to see all those responsibilities through. And I remember him saying to me, so it's very reassuring, he said, "You're a good Buddhist and you're a good daughter." So he kind of brought that all together for me, enabled me to carry on. So all those memories, of course, take place against the backdrop of his extraordinary exposition of the Dharma. And I was also fortunate to be at many of his teachings live, so many of his lecture series. One of my favourite series that I was present at is the creative symbols of the Tantric path to enlightenment. And I was so excited by the promise of that material. I was really keen on Tibetan Buddhism. This was quite an early lecture in the 1970s. So it took place in quite a small venue, and everybody was sitting on the floor, and I sat right at the front. But the power of Bhante's exposition of that material, which he was very in touch with, his energy, his faith, his conviction, his clarity, that energy coming at me, I just could not keep my eyes open. I just fell asleep into that kind of semi-stupor that happens sometimes. And each week I would move further back in the room. It was an 8-week series. By week 8, I had my back against the wall, and I still fell asleep. So just expresses the power of Bhante when he was in full flow of the Dharma. When the Dharma was flowing through him, he was definitely a force to be reckoned with. I had to listen to the lectures later on tape to find out what they were about. There's many things I could say about my relationship with Bhante. It's a relationship I appreciate very, very much. But I'll just leave you with a memory of my last meeting with him. So it was here, it was last October, and I was here on a Green Tara retreat. And that's the practice Bhante gave me when I was ordained in 1973. So we'd had quite a lively conversation leading up to and actually overrunning lunch. And eventually I said, I must get back to the retreat. And I said goodbye and left the room. I think I was mindful of the fact that I might not see him again, even though he was very well. So I went back into the room and said to him, "Bhante, I just want to say to you how grateful I am, how I appreciate the fact that you gave me the Green Tara practice." And he just put his hands together like this and sort of bowed, very humble, very devoted, and said, "And do you know who we received it from?" As though there was a joint reception of this practice. And we said in unison, Chetal Sanjay Dorje, which was the teacher who'd given Bhante that practice. So I was just left with this image of him. As I left the room, very moved, I was left with this image of him, just, with his hands bowed, so humble, so devotional, so reverential to Chetal Sanjay Dorje, into that practice. So this is a man who's had an enormous impact on my life, an enormous impact on many, many, many people's lives. But that kind of humility, that devotion is what stayed with me. So that's an image that I will hold in my heart for the rest of my life. So thank you, Urgen Sangharakshita, for giving me the gift of the Dharma.
So thank you so much, Dhammadinna. Beautiful memories. Dhammadinna is also one of our public preceptors, and I'm going to invite another public preceptor, this time one from India, to come and share some thoughts and memories. Before I do that, can I tell those of you who need to know that the live feed is back on in the shrine room. The screen is back up. So I'm going to ask Dhamacharya Mogasiddhi to come up and join us now. So Mogasiddhi, as a very young man, was involved in youth organisations dedicated to the work of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. And then when he met Triratna, he knew that he had met a community in which he could practice. He was ordained in the early 1990s and has been, for the last 7 years, also a member of the College of Public Preceptors. Mogasiddhi.
dear brothers and sisters, I really feel very fortunate and privileged to be here along with my 4 public preceptor friends from India. I'm really very happy to see so many Indian brothers and sisters who could come to this event. Actually, it is not easy to come to England for many Indian brothers and sisters, but still they could manage. It shows me how strong feeling they got for Bhante. And since we arrived here at Adhisthana, every day we were updating what is happening here. Right now, I believe that my many brothers and sisters in India, they are looking at this function, and they were very much keen that they attend this, even if they couldn't come to England at Adhisthana. Before coming to this, actually, we had in our mind that we will meet Bhante, we will see Bhante. And suddenly this news came that Bhante is no more. But really, as I said, we are really fortunate we still could come here and could see Bhante. What we call in India darshan, that is really very important. We could at least see Bhante, could take his darshan, and every day we were telling our brothers and sisters back in India what we are doing here, and people would ask us, have you met Bhante? And we could see how deeply they were moved, how strong gratitude they got. I would tell just a little story about myself, as Parmi said. We were involved with youth organization, and many inspired youth, very strong faith in Dr. Ambedkar, and particularly his vision about Buddhism, that Buddhism can help us to grow as human beings. Buddhism can help us to change the world. And even Dr. Ambedkar said that propagating the Dhamma, propagating Buddhism is service. But still, though we knew that this is a noble path we want to treat on, but really don't know how to practice it. We had very lofty ideal Dr. Ambedkar had given us. And as Subhuti said, in those days, very few people had that strong inspiration for Buddhism. But we very idealistic young people, we really wanted to live up to it. We want to really actualize what Dr. Ambedkar's vision to have new society based on liberty, equality and fraternity. But he said that these principles, these values, he had taken from his master, the Buddha. And we were a little bit struggling a bit, because always people were talking about these values as being social or political values. But as Dr. Ambedkar said, he has taken these values from his master, the Buddha. So it must be something much more than that, much more deeper. But we didn't know. But we were fortunate enough to come in contact with this Sangha, with Bhante. And very first time when I heard about Bhante, when I heard about Sangha, I first time heard Bhante's name. So I was a little bit curious, because I didn't know much about him. So I met many prominent leaders in Nagpur, those who were scholars, very upright, Ambedkarite Buddhist. And I went to them and inquired about Bhante Urgen Sangarakshita. And they were amazed. I mentioned his name, and they told me number of stories, because he was present at the time when Dr. Ambedkar passed away. And he was the only person who could really console people, who could really give people confidence, though your great leader is not there, but you don't have to worry. Buddha Dhamma Sangh will guide you. It will show you a path. So I heard many stories from number of people, but one particular person I remember. I went to him, and I always used to go to him to talk about Buddhism, talk about meditation. And I went to him and he said that, okay, what do you want to talk today? I said, I want to know about Bhante Sangarakshita. And he was just felt very happy He said, why did you want to know this? I said, I just came in contact with this Sangha, so I didn't know much about him. And he said, he's my teacher. And I was really amazed to see that I didn't know that before. And then many people I met, they said that Bhante Sangarajita is my teacher. And suddenly he went inside, he went to his library and brought one letter. And he showed me that letter. And that was the letter which Bhante had sent to Dr. Ambedkar at the time of mass conversion. And it was written so beautifully, and it was original letter he was having with him, because he was one of the main organizers of that mass conversion program. And that gave me really confidence that Bhante has got that connection with Dr. Ambedkar and mass conversion movement in India. And then I began to read books on Buddhism by Bhante Sangarachita. One particular book I remember, that was Ambedkar and Buddhism. And I think that was the only book I could see written exclusively on this subject, Dr. Ambedkar and Buddhism. There were many books, many things about Dr. Ambedkar, but nobody talked about Baba Sahib's vision about Buddhism, and that was really amazing. That really inspired me quite a lot and gave so much confidence that yes, we are on the right path and we need really Buddhism to change ourselves and to change the world. And when I read that book, it was so fascinating reading Bhante's meeting with Dr. Ambedkar. But particularly his last visit was really very moving. Bhante put that in a very nicely, I couldn't put in that way, but I remember how he put that. His last visit, Dr. Ambedkar was very desperate. He was worrying what would happen to his people, because just they became Buddhist, they just embraced Buddhism. But Dr. Ambedkar was really worrying what would happen, because he was very, very ill. He didn't know how long he is going to be there. So he was in a way sort of explaining Bhante what could be done, what is really needed to be done, and so much he was telling what he is thinking about. And Bhante explained that in the end he was so tired, he couldn't speak much, but he was just uttering, so much is to be done, so much is to be done. And I now believe it is Bhante who done quite a lot for us. Actually, I can't imagine without the Bhante, without the Sangha, what would have happened to India's revival of Buddhism. Because he was the only teacher who could really show us path. We knew this is the path. We knew that this is what we really wanted to do, because Dr. Ambedkar has inspired us, but we do not know how to treat this noble path, how to practice Buddhism. It is actually Bhante who has shown us this path. So we are immensely grateful and having very strong gratitude for Bhante. Bhante coined very important words, I think, in India, because as Subhuti said, mainly most of the leaders were very much engaged with political and social activities. Very less attention was given to Dr. Ambedkar's Dhamma work. But Bhante coined very important word, I believe, and that is Dhamma revolution. And reading Bhante's that talk, Dr. Ambedkar's Dhamma revolution, was really very inspiring. And he delivered so many talks, and I think that Bhante's talk, Dr. Ambedkar's vision about Buddhism, has given us very strong faith in Buddhism and very strong confidence that we can practice Buddhism. When you go to India, I am having contact with lots of people. I meet many people in villages and in towns and in slums even. If you go to small house in slum, hutment, you will be surprised to see their shrine. You will see Bhante's picture there. Very strong devotion for Bhante. And if you go to rich people, because there are many Ambedkarites, well educated, having very good jobs, very rich, having big mansion, very big houses, and you go to their house and you see their shrine, you will see Bhante's picture. Such a strong gratitude, such a strong respect. It happened because Bhante, in a way, through Buddhism, has given us new life. We always talk that Buddhism changed our life, but for us, Buddhism just doesn't change our life, it gives us new life. And many people could say that how they are benefited because of Bhante. And that is something Bhante did for us. Actually, at this moment, many people remembering him, expressing gratitude. And I really feel very fortunate that I am here right now. And my friends ask me, Amok Siddhi, whenever you will go to see Bhante, because we were telling every day that we are seeing Bhante, we've seen Bhante. So please take us with you. And my brothers and sisters, if you are listening now, I would like to tell you, I am taking all of you with me right now at this moment. And Bhante is in our heart and he will remain in our heart. There are a number of people who never met Bhante, but they got very strong respect for Bhante, strong gratitude. Very common people and lots of well-educated, some scholars, some Buddhist scholars, they got the same respect for Bhante. Before coming to this event, I was talking with one scholar in Nagpur who is very prominent, very renowned, and we met in a function, and he was inquiring about Bhante, any new literature. I told that now we got big project, we are producing all Bhante's literature in book forms. And then he said that Bhante is wonderful, and his words really wonderful. I like those words. He said, Bhante communicate Dhamma in a very simple way, yet very deep. It touches our heart. Because very common people, they say that we learn from Bhante, and even scholars, they feel that we learn from Bhante. And I believe, I have confidence that coming generation will always remember Bhante. They will be always grateful, and he is in our heart and will remain in our heart. Thank you.
So now we come to the part in the ceremony when we're going to perform the Sevenfold Puja. Again, if you wish to take a break or do anything, that's fine. Come in, go out. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of us here. And we could say that today, well, I think always, Adhisthana is a sacred space. So the Sevenfold Puja is going to be taking place here today and actually in all parts of our Triratna world. So this Sevenfold Puja, many years ago, was compiled by Bhante from Shantideva's Bodhicharya Avatara. Through this puja, through this practice of this puja, we open ourselves up to the blessings and influence of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. We dedicate ourselves to the Bodhisattva ideal, and we cultivate the conditions for the arising of Bodhichitta. Subhuti had mentioned the suprapersonal force. This is another way of talking about Bodhichitta. So I just want to preface our performance of this puja by reading a few of Bhante's own words about Bodhichitta. So this is Bhante speaking to us today. Bodhichitta literally means the thought of or will to enlightenment. But the main point to grasp is that it is not someone's individual will in the narrow sense. You do, of course, have to start off with an individual will, making an individual effort. But the bodhicitta is something which, as it were, supervenes upon that individual spiritual effort. When it reaches a very high degree of purity, refinement, positivity, and openness. It is as if the stream or tendency making for enlightenment takes you over. That is where the surrender comes in. You surrender yourself to it, open yourself to it, become a channel for it. You are no longer you, in a narrow, egoistic sense. There is something higher working through you. You are still recognizably there as an individual living being, functioning in the world. But in fact, it is not just you functioning. It is the Bodhichitta functioning, moving in the direction of the enlightenment of all beings. So, we're going to do a simple Sevenfold Puja, the 7 stages with the refuges and precepts, and the 2 mantras out of the 5 that Bhante asked us to chant at the time of his death. So the mantras of Manjughosha, Manjushri, and Padmasambhava. And as we chant these mantras, we will be invoking the qualities also of Ugyen Sangharakshita. Sevenfold Puja. With Mandarava, blue lotus and jasmine. With all flowers pleasing and fragrant. And with garlands skillfully woven. I pay honour to the princes of the sages. So worthy of veneration. I envelop them in clouds of incense. Sweet and penetrating. I make them offerings of food, hard and soft. And pleasing kinds of liquids to drink. I offer festooned with golden lotus. On the paving, sprinkled with perfume. I scatter handfuls of beautiful flowers.